Okay, so it's day 213, and the big story today is how the Ukrainians are handling the referendums. They can't stop the referendums, but they can actually approach it in a reasonably smart way. And so you'll see what I'm talking about in just a moment. Hi, my name is Darren Gertis. If you don't know me, I do daily updates on Ukraine. I always do a section, or usually do a section at the end, with Fun with Russian State Media, where I look at their actual media and I talk about what's going on there. Today, I found the two of the truest Russian state media articles that I've ever seen. Like, there was not a word in there that I thought was incorrect or misleading or anything. It's bizarre. It's baffling that it was so accurate. Stick with me all the way to the end. I want to start here, though. We're talking about the Russians summoning their people to conscript them for war, and it's disproportionately hitting certain groups, certain ethnic groups, and rural populations much harder. So, for example, this is in Interfax Ukraine. They're talking about Crimean Tatars are receiving 90% of the summons to the army of Crimea. At the same time, they're 13 to 15% of the population. Now, that's really interesting. These are like the indigenous people that were there before Russia was fighting. They're actually related to Turks. And during the 1930s, Stalin wiped out most of them, sent most of them to Siberia. I talked about this a long time ago in Why Crimea Matters, everything that you need to know about Crimea. Go to my webpage, and then it's one of the explainers, Why Crimea Matters. And it's what's fascinating about this is just like how this region of the world has played so much into geopolitics over time. It's fascinating. But yeah, Crimean Tatars are citizens and indigenous people of Ukraine whom Russia deliberately eliminate by sending to the war against their own state. At a 90% rate. I mean, that's fascinating. Okay. Zelensky talking to his own people. I have a simple request to all our people in the temporarily occupied territory. Do the main thing, save your lives, and help us weaken and destroy occupiers. So don't go vote. That's one of the things. And if you get conscripted, then help us sabotage. He said this: by any means, avoid conscription letters and try to free the territory of Ukraine. But if you do get into the Russian army, sabotage any activity of the enemy, hinder any Russian operations, provide us with an important information about the occupiers to their bases, headquarters, warehouses with ammunition, and at the first opportunity, switch our positions, do everything to save your life and help liberate Ukraine. This is really a stupid thing for the Russians to be doing, to conscript people that are pro-Ukrainian, that are, I mean, yes, you can get them into that Russian uniform, but if you bring in a fifth column, it could be very bad for Russia. Okay, the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group. Russia needs sham referendums on occupied territory to forcibly mobilize Ukrainians as cannon fodder. And that's what they're trying to do. But if enough of them are sabotaging from within, it could go very, very bad for the Russians. Even Fedorov, mayor of Melitopol, has predicted that the Russians will soon begin a real hunt for men in occupied parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast, and advises all Melitopol residents to call up age to leave immediately, like get out. On June 14th, the wives of a number of men from the so-called Donetsk People's Republic issued an appeal saying that they had not heard from him or about their husbands since the later were mobilized, seized in their workplace. Yeah, they went to their workplace and like took them right to the army from there. Serhiy Haidai, the head of Luhansk Regional Administration, the governor there, reported on August 13th new methods of forced mobilization. These included tricking elderly people in apartment blocks to give them information about men of call-up age in exchange for food or small amounts of money. They had people waiting outside the entrances to such blocks to catch men of the relevant age. So, I mean, that's the things that they're doing to try to get people into the army. So, it seems like that's kind of a bad plan. Occupiers dropped containers with poisonous substance on AFU positions. If this is true, and it was some kind of chlorine substance dropped with the help of a drone, if this is true, that's chemical warfare. That's a war crime. It's against the Geneva Convention. Since World War I, we've outlawed that. Multiple jail terms for patriotic Ukrainian song at the Crimean Tatar wedding of Russian-occupied Crimea. So they played some patriotic songs, and the songs in question were Red Kalyana, which we know now as Stefiana by Kalush Orchestra. It's the same tune. On the first charge, this lady is fined 30,000 rubles. On the second, jailed for 5 days. The restaurant owner was jailed for 15 days for that. Like, how desperate are you? Expect dissent to rise as Putin's call-up brings war back home to Russians. So here we're talking about mobilization. Russian society has been repressed to the core and has become compliant. Says the head of the Carnegie Moscow Center think tank, who has researched the country's attitudes toward the conflict. Now, I talked about him yesterday or the day before, talking about like why are Russians like Russians support the war at like 75%, something like that. Yet now it's starting to shift, and you're going to see some of the shift. Kolesnikov said that much of Russia's population had been forced into a state of anticipatory obedience, where a perceived inability to influence events encourages people to become passive. Like they're like, well, what am I going to do about this anyway? Kolesnikov's research also found that Russian public support for the war against Ukraine is less solid than you would think, leading him to believe that Putin's mobilization order might prove to be a costly gamble. And we'll see how that all plays out. Okay, more worrying for the Kremlin, observers say, as the unrest is starting to bubble up away from the big cities in regions traditionally strongholds for the regime. At least 3 military recruitment offices have been attacked since the Putin's mobilization order. That's fascinating. And in Chechnya, which is by far the country's most repressive region, since for the last 15 years, there's a strong man that's been in power there. It's even been there. So that's some pretty fascinating stuff. Let's look now at this, talking about not just the mobilization, but the referendums. Occupying Kharkiv region demanded personal data in return for food. When the Russians arrived, I lost 10 kilograms. My wife lost 8 kilograms. There was almost nothing to eat for the first 2 months, one customer, Valerie, recalled. Showing off his reduced waistline, he joked grimly, that's the upside of Moscow rule. So they're kind of starving. So what do they do when they're starving? They go in exchange for some information, here's some food. As it is, the vote is being conducted this weekend in the areas Russia still occupies. They include most of the southern Kherson region, a mere third of Zaporizhia Oblast. And I was like, wait a minute, how much of Zaporizhia do they actually control? There's something to this. And large chunks of Luhansk and Donetsk. Now, I don't know if that third means third occupied or third by population, but nonetheless, you see on a map, look at how much this is Zaporizhia. There's a huge chunk. They're holding a referendum in this, and this is not controlled. Same with Donetsk. Look at Donetsk. Almost half of Donetsk is not controlled, but they're holding this, so it becomes even more of a sham. At least in Luhansk, they control almost all of it. They don't control all of it anymore because a little corner of this they have now carved out in the last week or so. And in Kherson, I believe it's the same way, that they don't control all of Kherson. Next week, Putin will announce the results. To the surprise of no one, they will show overwhelming mandate for these new territories to join with Moscow, and that's, of course, that's baked in. We know that that's what's going to happen. Let me get to the end. Yet Russia is a colossus, but look at its feet; they are made of clay. Valerie said, and I think there's something very right about that. I think there's something like. They know that they have to hurry up, because if they don't hurry up, it's going to be over for them, and that's why they're doing this now. So that's showing their weakness. Okay, vote annexation in Russian occupied parts of Ukraine held for a second day. So how are the people reacting? Ukrainian military general staff said on September 24th that employees of the election commissions, accompanied by armed servicemen of the military of Russian Federation, were collecting signatures of local residents directly at their homes. So they come to your door, say, here's your ballot. Do you want to join Ukraine to Russia? And there's an armed soldier there. Do you want to say no? I mean, it's not exactly a free, fair election. The world will react absolutely justly to pseudo-referendums, as they have be unequivocally condemned, said Zelensky. And I hope he's right. Here's another picture of, like, look how much of Donetsk is not controlled. Look how much of Zaporizhia is not controlled. Having a referendum now doesn't even make sense. Now, at the end, there's another interesting thing at the end here. It's also seized the personal and biometric data of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian citizens at so-called filtration camps, opening the door, experts say, to ballot manipulation. So you can say, well, so-and-so voted, and because we have all that information, whether they did or didn't. Russia has little history of holding free and fair elections, with ballot stuffing, voter intimidation, outright fraud, and media manipulation as common practices. It held similar illegal vote in 2014 after occupying Ukraine's Crimea region. Very few countries have accepted the results of the vote. Okay, so the Crimean vote, 97% of the population voted to join Russia. Now, there's no 97% of vote anywhere in the free world. I mean, U.S. presidents barely get, they rarely get 60%. I think like 2 or 3 U.S. presidents have gotten more than 60% of the vote. So think about that. 97% and with an 80-something% turnout. No, that wasn't free and fair. That was a sham as well. Okay, hide and seek. Ukrainians try to dodge annexation. This is just as Zelensky was saying, so the vote is seen as a sham. They're trying to avoid leaving their apartment at all. Refusing to answer when election officials knock at the door is a sign of silent protest. And I think there's something really powerful and profound about this, and the world is watching, or at least hopefully some of the world is. You are, and I thank you for that. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about this. Aside from dodging election officials, Ukrainians have shown their resistance to the illegal vote by plastering blue and yellow posters in hallways of apartment buildings with the words, "You can't change the border of Ukraine with a referendum," and "Stop the referendum." Yeah, and so they're doing their part to resist. However, they could buckle under pressure if forced to vote. There are no options to not to tick a box, given that you are essentially voting at gunpoint. I mean, no, there's not somebody holding a gun to you saying you must vote, but if they're standing there with an armed guard, what do you think is the implication? Ticking the no could also lead to threats down the road. The best thing, officials said, is to stay at home until the vote is over. That's right. They're doing this under duress. And under duress in law means that it didn't count. And so that's how that works. Okay. Let's look at this. This is the precedent of Russia's page. There's an amendment on granting Russian citizenship to foreign nationals who entered into a contract on serving the Russian armed forces. So if you're a foreigner, if you're from some other territory and you want to become a Russian, serve in the Russian army for 1 year, and that's all it's required, for no less than 1 year, and you have the right to apply to Russian citizenship. So that they're doing this is showing you they need it. They're desperate. They're working at trying to replenish their army. Okay, let's look at fun with Russian state media. Okay, Putin's mobilization decree. And by the way, this is the most fascinating thing about this. This is actually like legitimate reporting. So here we go. The content of the 7th paragraph decree on partial motivation is not to be disclosed. Now, somebody asked me about this on Friday. We're doing a Q&A about Ukraine, and somebody asked me about the 7th paragraph. I didn't know anything about it at the time, and I've since read about this. According to Peskov, the content of the 7th paragraph is secret and is intended solely for official use. Its content is related to the number of citizens to be mobilized. Now, there's some talk that 7th paragraph, which has been redacted, is not for 300,000 people. It's actually for upwards of 1 million soldiers. And so that could be a real thing, but it's classified now, so we don't know what's in it. Just that Putin's making these moves that he's making is telling me he's still in this. He's not trying to back out. Okay, and the last thing here, this is an RT as well. Again, this is the truest RT article I have ever read in my life. Under new legislation approved by the Russian president, violators could see upwards of 10 years behind bars. So the new legislation rammed through last week. Russian service members who voluntarily surrender to the enemy forces during an armed conflict will now face up to 10 years behind bars upon returning home. Service members who refuse to take part in armed hostilities, as well as those who desert or dodge being drafted, will face up to 10 years. You don't do this if you're strong. You're doing this because you're weak, and that's what's going on. Okay, thanks for your time. I appreciate it, and I'll be back tomorrow.